The Icy Heiress everyone in that house feared closed her eyes on the study couch and pretended to be asleep, only to see whose name my son would call out in the dark. It wasn't mine. 3 months before that night, I was on my knees in the east hallway of Thorn Hall, scrubbing a wine stain out of a rug older than my grandmother, while the housekeeper stood over me listing everything I was doing wrong. My name is Wren Calloway. I was 29 years old, and I had been a maid for 14 months, and before that I had been a nurse for 6 years, and before that I had been a girl who believed that doing the right thing always worked out. That last part hadn't survived contact with reality. "You missed a spot, Mrs. Pruitt said, in the tone of a woman doing me a favor by noticing I existed. The charity case doesn't get to leave stains on Miss Thorne's floors. I didn't look up. I had learned, in 14 months, that looking up cost more than it earned. My knees ached. My son was down the hall in the staff kitchen, 5 years old, quiet as a held breath, because quiet was safer, and he had learned that faster than any child should have to. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss where this one goes. I finished the stain. I always finished the stain. That was the whole shape of my life since the hospital board stripped my license. Finish what's in front of you. Don't ask why it's there. And never, ever explain yourself to anyone who's already decided who you are. The house I worked in belonged to Isolde Thorne, and Isolde Thorne belonged to no one. The papers called her the Icy Heiress, and she had built an empire to deserve it. Container ships, ports on 4 continents, a boardroom voice that could end a career in 1 sentence. She was 34. She had inherited Thorne Maritime at 26. When her father's heart gave out in a meeting, he refused to leave, and she had not, according to every member of the staff who'd worked there longer than me, smiled since. I had been in the house 14 months and spoken to her 4 times, and 3 of those times were her telling me to move. I hadn't taken this job because I wanted to be invisible. I had taken it because invisible was the only kind of safe left to me. 6 years ago, I was a charge nurse in a busy ER, and a senior physician named Marcus Ashford gave a patient the wrong dose at the end of a double shift, and I was the one who caught it before it killed anyone, and I was the one who got blamed when his father, the hospital board chairman, a man named Reginald Ashford, decided that his son's mistake would become my confession instead. I signed the paper they put in front of me. I had a 2-month-old baby and a best friend, a nurse named Ann Kessler, 7 months pregnant, who Marcus had threatened to ruin next if I didn't take the fall alone. So I took it. I lost my license. I never told anyone the truth, not even Milo, not yet. Because the truth hadn't done anything for me except cost me everything I'd built. I didn't know that the truth was about to come looking for me anyway, wearing a very expensive coat and a very familiar last name. What I knew was that Milo had wandered again into the east wing he wasn't supposed to be in, and that Isolde Thorne's study door was open, and that my son, my careful, quiet, doesn't-talk-to-strangers son, was standing in the doorway of the one room in this house everyone else avoided like it had teeth. Milo, I said his name low. Urgent. Already moving. Milo, come here, baby. That's Miss Thorne's he didn't come. He was looking at something on her desk, small and gold, catching the window light, and Isolde Thorne herself was standing 3 feet from him, absolutely still, watching my son reach toward it, with the kind of frozen attention I'd only ever seen on her in board photographs right before she destroyed someone. Milo Calloway. My voice cracked on his name. Get away from there right now. He looked back at me and then at her and made a decision that would end up rearranging both our lives. He didn't run to me. He ran to her. Small arms went around her leg before either of us could stop it, before I could even finish crossing the room, and I watched the Icy Heiress of Thorn Maritime go rigid as a struck bell. One hand hovering over my son's dark hair, like she didn't know the rules for this, like nobody had ever taught her what you were supposed to do when a child chose you. "I'm so sorry," I got out, prying him gently loose, my face burning. "He knows better. He's never, I don't know why he was looking at the compass." Isolde's voice was flat, controlled, the voice from the boardroom photographs, but her eyes hadn't left him. It was my nephew's. I went still at was. Nobody in this house talked about the Thorn family's dead. I'd learned that in month 2, the hard way, after asking an innocent question at dinner and watching the whole table go to ice. "I'll keep him out of this wing," I said. "It won't happen again. See that it doesn't," she said, and turned back to her desk, and that should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because as I pulled Milo toward the door, I heard her say, quiet, almost to herself, "Not quite meant for me. He wasn't afraid." And something in the way she said it told me that in 14 months of watching this house from the floor, I had only ever seen the very top of what Isolde Thorn was carrying. 2 weeks later, I found out exactly how heavy it was in the middle of a dinner party when she went down. It happened fast, the way these things do, a sharp intake of breath at the head of the table, a glass tipping, 12 guests in silk and tailoring frozen mid-sentence, while their host's hand flew to her throat and her chair scraped back, and nobody, not one single person in that room of shipping magnates and senators' wives, moved. I was 3 steps away with a tray of empty glasses. I put it down so fast, one shattered. "She's in anaphylaxis," I said, already moving, already on my knees beside her chair, my hands finding her pulse before my brain finished the sentence. "Someone call for an ambulance. Now, does she carry an epinephrine injector? Check her jacket, inside pocket, left side." Nobody moved. 12 people who ran continents froze at the sight of their host's throat closing, and I heard Mrs. Pruitt somewhere behind me hissing my name like I'd committed a crime by kneeling. I found the injector myself. I'd have found a way without it. 6 years of ER training don't leave you just because someone takes your license. But it was there, in her jacket, exactly where a woman who'd built an empire on contingency planning would have put it. I administered it against her thigh through the fabric, counted the seconds out loud because counting kept my hands steady, watched her breath fight its way back open. "You're all right," I told her, low, just for her, my hand still on her wrist. "I've got you. Breathe with me." In for 4. Isolde Thorn, who I had watched end careers with a single sentence, who 12 powerful strangers had watched seize with terror in their eyes, looked up at me from the floor of her own dining room with something I had never once seen on her face in 14 months. She looked at me like I was the only steady thing in the room. "Who," she said when she could speak again, her voice raw, "are you?" And underneath the panic, underneath the shattered glass and her guests' stunned silence, I caught it, the first time I ever really registered it, sharp and cold and unmistakable, cutting through the dining room's cologne and candle smoke, black pepper and riverstone. That was her. That was Isolde Thorn, under all the ice. She smelled, up close, like a storm that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to break. The ambulance came anyway, because I insisted, because 6 years out of practice doesn't mean you stop being careful with someone else's life. I rode with her as far as the gate, because she asked me to, in a voice too rough to be a command. And somewhere in that 10-minute drive down the private road, holding her hand while the paramedics monitored her vitals, I understood that something had shifted that neither of us had agreed to. She was released from the hospital by morning, allergy to a rebranded Canap ingredient nobody had flagged, and by that evening, Mrs. Pruitt informed me, tight-lipped and furious, that Miss Thorne wanted me moved off general staff duties and into the household proper, days shadowing the family wing, evenings free. Milo enrolled in the staff school on the property instead of the county bus route he'd been taking alone, since I couldn't afford the fare and the hours both. "Don't get comfortable," Mrs. Pruitt said, in the tone of a woman watching her own authority erode in real time. "Women like her don't keep charity cases around for sentiment." I didn't answer her. I was too busy watching Milo, 3 days later, walk straight past his own bedroom door at bedtime and knock, soft and hopeful, on the studies. I told myself it was gratitude. That's what I told myself for the next 2 weeks, while my son's visits to that study stopped being accidents and started being a routine nobody had scheduled, while Isolde Thorne, who by every account in this house did not tolerate children, noise, or interruption, began leaving the door unlocked at exactly the hour Milo tended to wander. I should have known better than to call it gratitude. Gratitude doesn't make a woman rearrange her whole evening around a 5-year-old's bedtime. The East Wing, once I was allowed into it properly, told a story nobody in the house would say out loud. A nursery, untouched, door always shut. A framed photograph in the hall of a woman who had Isolde's exact bone structure holding an infant, both of them laughing, dated 14 years back. And in Isolde's study, in the drawer she thought she'd locked, that same small brass compass Milo had reached for, engraved on the underside in letters worn nearly smooth, "Always find your way home." That was my sister's, Isolde said, one evening, catching me looking at it while I collected Milo for bed. Her voice had no warmth and no ice either, just a flatness that cost her something to hold. It belonged to her son. Charlie, he was 14 months old. I didn't ask what happened. I'd learned enough by then to know some doors you wait for someone to open themselves. I was 19, she said anyway, looking at the compass and not at me. I was watching him on the boat. My father called about a shipment. I turned my back for less than 2 minutes. The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind you could set a hand on. "I'm so sorry," I said, and meant it more than I'd meant almost anything I'd said in that house. "Everyone is," Isolde said. "It never seems to matter." Then, quieter, almost involuntary, "Your son isn't afraid of me." "He's never been afraid of much," I said. "He decides who's safe faster than I do." Something crossed her face then, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one, filed somewhere she hadn't visited in a long time. "Small and steady," I told her, without quite meaning to say it out loud, "beats big and loud." My father used to say that. She looked at me a beat too long. "Your father sounds like he knew something about surviving." "He knew a lot about it," I said. "I learned most of what I know from watching him do it." I didn't know, that night, tucking Milo in after his 4th visit to a study that used to be off-limits to the entire house, that I was watching the front edge of something enormous begin to turn, that a woman who had spent 15 years building walls thick enough to survive a boardroom coup had just let a 5-year-old and his exhausted mother find the one door in Thorne Hall she'd never meant to leave open. I found out 3 days later, and it came with teeth. Wren Calloway. Celeste Ashford said my name in the front hall like she was tasting something bad, and I felt every hair on my arms rise before I'd even fully turned around. I recognized the surname before I recognized the face, recognized it the way you recognize a scar, from the inside. I thought that was you. It's been, 6 years? I hadn't seen an Ashford since the day I signed the paper that ended my career. Celeste had been at the hospital board meeting, 22 then, silent in the corner in a way I'd mistaken for irrelevant. She wasn't irrelevant now. She was Reginald Ashford's daughter, Marcus Ashford's sister, and, I learned in the same breath, watching her drape herself familiarly against the banister like she already owned it, Isolde Thorne's oldest family friend, in Thorne Hall to finalize a shipping alliance between their two empires that half the business papers had already started calling a merger of more than companies. "You're the maid," Celeste said, delighted, cruel underneath the silk of it. "Isolde's little household project. That's precious. Does she know what you did?" "I didn't do anything," I said, and my voice shook despite every effort not to let it. "That's not how the file reads." Celeste's smile didn't move, falsifying a medication record, endangering a patient. "It's a shame, really. You always seemed so competent, standing there in your scrubs pretending you belonged in that hospital." She tilted her head. "I wonder how Isolde would feel, letting someone like that near her house, near her name." "Say what you're actually here to say," I told her, because I was done, 6 years done, being spoken to like a stain someone was deciding whether to remove. "I'm here," Celeste said, "to marry your employer and to make sure nothing ugly is standing in the doorway when I do." "Consider this the only warning you get," she smiled, sweet and rotten as fruit left too long in the sun, and walked away before I could answer, leaving behind a perfume so cloying it turned my stomach. Something like gardenia gone slightly wrong. Sweetness with a sour thread running underneath it. The same thread running under every word she'd just said to me. I stood in that hallway a long time after she'd gone, my hands shaking, because Celeste Ashford hadn't just threatened my job. She'd just told me, without saying it outright, that the family who destroyed my career 6 years ago was about to become the family my son's only real home was married into, and that this time there would be nowhere left to run. I didn't tell Isolde. I told myself it wasn't my place, that a maid didn't get to weigh in on who the lady of the house married, that Celeste's threat was probably just cruelty for its own sake and would pass like weather. I told myself a lot of things that week. None of them were true, and all of them fell apart 3 nights later when the storm came in off the water and knocked half the county's power out, and Milo woke up screaming. Croup, I diagnosed before I was even fully awake, my body remembering 6 years of ER instinct faster than my mind caught up, that terrible sealbark cough. The stridor on his inhale, his small chest working too hard in the dark. I had him upright, had steam running in the bathroom, had my hand flat and calm against his back within 90 seconds, my voice low, and even though my heart was slamming. I'm right here, I told him. I'll always find you in the dark, remember? I promised. Breathe with me, baby. In slow, the power went fully out mid-breath, plunging the staff quarters into black, and Milo's cough spiraled worse with the fear of it, and I was reaching for a phone I already knew had no signal in this wing, when the door opened without a knock, and Isolde Thorne came in wearing a robe and carrying a battery lantern like she'd been awake and listening for exactly this. Croup, I said, before she could ask. I need him upright, warm steam, and if it doesn't ease in 10 minutes he needs a hospital, storm or no storm. Tell me what you need, she said, and there was no ice in it at all. None. Just a low, steady command that somehow made the room feel safer instead of smaller. We spent the next hour on the bathroom floor together, Isolde holding the lantern and running hot water for steam while I counted Milo's breaths out loud. And somewhere in the middle of it, when his cough finally started to ease into something survivable, she reached into her robe pocket and pressed something small and cold and metal into his hand. Hold this, she told him, quiet, certain. It kept my nephew brave on stormy nights. It'll do the same for you. Milo's fingers closed around the compass like she'd handed him a piece of armor. His breathing eased another notch, the way children's fear does when an adult hands them something solid to believe in. You don't have to, I started. I want to, Isolde said. And that was the whole answer, and I let it be. He fell asleep an hour later, curled between us on a pallet of couch cushions on the bathroom floor, one hand fisted around the brass compass, and Isolde and I sat in the lantern light, not talking, the storm working itself out against the windows, and I thought, not for the first time, but for the first time without flinching from it, that I had never in my life felt as safe as I did, sitting on cold tile beside a woman the whole world called untouchable. He calls for you, I said eventually, very quiet. In the night. Not just tonight. Other nights too, when he has bad dreams. He calls your name before he calls mine. Isolde didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice had gone somewhere I hadn't heard it go before, unguarded, almost afraid of itself. I used to think, she said, that if I never let myself matter to a child again, I couldn't fail one again. She looked down at Milo, at his fist around the compass that had outlived one boy already. I don't think that's true anymore. I think I've just been failing myself instead. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing and reached over, careful, and set my hand over hers on the tile, and she didn't pull away. That was the night I stopped pretending this was gratitude. The days after the storm were the softest I could remember since before I lost everything, small things, ordinary things, made enormous by who they came from. Isolde had the kitchen make the soup my mother used to make me, chicken and rice with too much black pepper. After I mentioned it once in passing about Milo's favorite sick day meal, I found out later she'd tracked down the recipe herself, asked the cook to test 3 versions until it was right. She started reading to Milo at night, the same battered lighthouse book he'd loved since he was 3, her low voice making the storm in the story sound survivable, the way she'd made the real one survivable too. You know he's going to want a lighthouse for his birthday now, I told her one evening, watching her fold herself onto the study floor beside his blanket fort like it was the most natural thing in the world for the head of Thorn Maritime to be doing. Then he'll have one, Isolde said, and I laughed, actually laughed, something I hadn't done freely in this house in 14 months, and she looked up at the sound of it like I'd handed her something rare. You scare people, I told her, still smiling. Do you know that? The whole staff thinks you're made of ice. I know what they think. She didn't look away from me. What do you think? I think, I said, and my heart was going too fast, that you're the least icy person I've ever met. I think you just never had anyone stay long enough to find that out. You've stayed, she said. It wasn't a question. I've stayed, I agreed. She reached up, slow, giving me every chance in the world to step back, and brushed a strand of hair off my face, her fingers warm against my temple. Tell me to stop, she said. Quiet, certain, and I will. Every time. Always. Don't stop, I told her, and meant it with everything 6 years of guarding myself had left in me, and she closed the last of the distance between us, as careful as she'd been with Milo's compass, like I was something worth being gentle with. I told her that night, finally, the whole truth about the hospital, Marcus Ashford's mistake, his father's threat, Anne Kessler pregnant and terrified, the paper I'd signed to protect the only friend I had left. Isolde listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening at the name Ashford, and when I finished, she took my hands in both of hers. Gentle, deliberate. You didn't lose your career, she said. It was taken from you by people who are about to learn that I don't forgive what's done to what's mine. I should have felt only relief hearing that. Instead, underneath it, a cold thread of dread wound through me. because I already knew, better than anyone in that house, exactly how far the Ashfords would go to keep their name clean. I found out 4 days later, standing in the front hall again, except this time it wasn't Celeste smiling at me. It was Mrs. Pruitt holding a folded newspaper, and the look on her face told me before a single word did that whatever was on that page had already been read by everyone in the house except me. Falsified records, the headline said, above a photo of me in scrubs 6 years younger. Above a story so carefully twisted it took me a full minute to recognize my own life in it. Wren Calloway, disgraced nurse, endangering the son of her wealthy employer, history of falsifying medical documents, currently residing unsupervised with a minor in the home of Isolde Thorne. Every fact technically true. Every fact arranged to look like something monstrous. "Where is Milo?" I said, my voice not sounding like mine. "Miss Ashford," Mrs. Pruitt said, with something that might almost have been pity, "has already spoken to Child Protective Services. There's a caseworker in the drawing room." And Miss Thorne, she hesitated, and that hesitation was worse than anything that came after it. "The board is threatening to pull the alliance over the scandal. She's with them now. She asked me to keep you and the boy in the staff quarters until she's finished." I understood, standing there, exactly what Celeste had built. Not just an accusation, but a trap with no clean exit. One where the only way Isolde saved the alliance her whole empire depended on was by being seen to distance herself from me. And the only way she saved me was by risking everything the Thorne name had left. I packed Milo's things with my hands shaking so hard I dropped his shirts twice, his lighthouse book, the brass compass he refused to let go of even to sleep, while he watched me with a 5-year-old's terrible understanding that something was very wrong. "Are we in trouble?" he asked. "No, baby." My voice broke on it. "You are never in trouble. I promise you that." I didn't see Isolde before the caseworker cleared us to stay, provisionally, under supervision, pending review. Didn't see her at all that whole endless day, and I told myself it was because she was fighting for us in that boardroom. But by nightfall, when Mrs. Pruitt informed me, not unkindly for once, that Miss Thorne had signed a temporary statement distancing the household from unverified claims pending investigation, I understood that the woman who had held a lantern for my sick son on a bathroom floor had just, under unbearable pressure, let the world believe I might be exactly what the headline said. I sat on the edge of Milo's borrowed bed that night, with the lights off, his small, warm weight curled against my side, the compass clutched in his fist, glinting faintly in the dark, and I let myself cry the way I hadn't let myself cry in 6 years, quiet, so he wouldn't wake, for everything I'd already lost once and was about to lose again. I didn't hear the door open. I heard the compass thump softly against the floor as Milo, in his sleep, shifted and his hand went loose, and I looked up to gather it before I lost that too, and found Isolde standing in the doorway instead, still in her boardroom clothes, looking like a woman who had spent the last 6 hours in a war and hadn't yet decided if she'd won it. "I didn't distance myself from you," she said, before I could speak, her voice low and urgent and nothing like the flat control I'd heard in that first month. "I distanced the company from an unverified press claim, because that is the only language that board understands, and I needed 36 hours to do this properly instead of doing it in front of cameras where the Ashfords control the story." Wren. She crossed the room, knelt in front of me, took both my hands like she had that first night. "I am not walking away from you. I have never in my life meant anything the way I mean that. Celeste has already." "Celeste," Isolde said. And something in her voice went sharp enough to cut. "Made one mistake tonight. She threatened a child to get to me. My legal team has spent 6 hours proving her father falsified the very records he's accusing you of falsifying. She reached into her jacket and set a small recorder on the bed between us. Ann Kessler called me an hour ago. She's been carrying a recording of Marcus Ashford admitting the error, on the record, for 6 years. She was too afraid to use it. She isn't afraid anymore. I stared at that recorder like it might disappear if I looked away. She said, Isolde added, quieter now, that she owed you 6 years of silence, and she wasn't going to let you lose everything twice. I put my hand over my mouth, and Isolde pulled me into her, careful of Milo sleeping between us, her lips against my hair, her voice a vow low enough only I could hear it. I will always find you in the dark, she said, giving my own words back to me like a promise sealed twice over. That includes this one. The Ashfords didn't go quietly. Reginald sent men to the hall 2 nights later, private security dressed like guests, to retrieve what he called family property, meaning the recorder, meaning proof, meaning anything that could stop the story he needed the world to believe. I woke to shouting in the east wing and found Isolde already between them and the study door where Milo slept, her body a wall, her voice a blade, and I watched the woman the papers called the Icy Heiress take a shove meant to knock her aside and not move an inch. Not 1 inch. Standing over the room where my son was sleeping, like nothing on earth was going to get past her. It cost her a torn shoulder and a split lip, and I was on her within seconds, hands steady from 6 years of practice, assessing, pressing, ordering the guests she employed to call actual authorities instead of handling it themselves. You didn't have to do that, I told her later, cleaning the cut above her eyebrow with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He's mine too, she said, simple as breathing, and I understood then that she didn't mean it as a figure of speech. You both are, if you'll let me be that for you. Reginald Ashford's men were arrested before dawn, and by the time the sun came up, the recording was already with the district attorney, and Ann Kessler was on record, and Celeste Ashford's carefully built story had a hole in it wide enough to drive a fleet through. Isolde wanted to bury them completely. I watched it in her face at the emergency board call 2 days later, watched her lay out enough evidence to end the Ashford family's standing in that industry forever, and I put my hand on her arm before she said the words that would have made it a massacre instead of justice. Let the truth do it, I told her. Quiet, just for her. Not you. You don't have to become what they are to win this. She looked at me a long moment, and something in her shoulders eased, like I'd handed her permission she hadn't known she needed. For you, she said, only for you would I choose mercy over ruin. The press conference happened 8 days after the storm. I stood at the back of a room full of the same journalists who'd printed Celeste's story, watching Isolde Thorne, the Icy Heiress, cold and untouchable and feared by everyone in that room, play a recording that unmade 6 years of lies in 4 minutes, watching Reginald Ashford's face empty out live on camera, watching Celeste, seated beside her ruined father, finally understand that sweetness poured over rot doesn't stop the rot from showing. Wren Calloway, Isolde said into that room full of microphones, her voice carrying to every corner, did not falsify anything. She protected an innocent woman's career and her own child's future from a family who has spent 6 years letting an innocent nurse carry their son's mistake. She is, without exaggeration, the most competent medical mind I have ever watched work under pressure, including my own emergency, which she saved without hesitation the week I met her. Any further questions about her character can be directed to me personally. The room went dead silent, and then it didn't matter anymore, because I wasn't looking at the room. I was looking at her, and she was already crossing the space between us, in front of every camera in that building. And she took my face in both her hands, careful, giving me every chance to step back, the way she always did. "Tell me to stop," she said. "One more time, one last time, and I will." "Don't you dare," I told her, and she didn't, and the flashbulbs went off around a kiss that would be on the front page of every paper that had printed lies about me a week before. And this time, the story would finally be true. The bite came that night, private. Just the two of us in the quiet of the study where all of this had started, her forehead against mine, her voice steady with a question she'd already asked me twice that day in different words. "Are you certain?" she asked, her mouth at my throat, close enough that I could feel every word. "I've never been more certain of anything," I told her, and the bond snapped into place between us, like something that had been waiting years for the right hands to close around it. Warm where I'd been cold for 6 years, steady where I'd been bracing for the next blow my whole life. Reginald Ashford was indicted within the month, stripped of his hospital board seat. His son Marcus's medical license revoked pending charges. Celeste Ashford's engagement announcements were quietly, permanently withdrawn from every paper that had run them, and the last I heard, she'd left the state entirely, her family name no longer opening the doors it once had. Mrs. Pruitt was let go within the week. Her replacement, a woman who'd worked with me on the floor for 14 months and never once called me a charity case. A year later, almost to the day, Isolde and I stood at the edge of the water behind Thorn Hall, the same water her family's ships had crossed for 3 generations, and made our vows in front of the small, fierce circle of people who'd earned a place in our lives. Anne Kessler, license fully restored, standing beside her own 2-year-old daughter, Isolde's gruff, loyal second in command, who leaned over to me during the ceremony and murmured that in 15 years working for that woman, he had never once seen her wait for anyone the way she'd waited, patiently, completely, for me. My nursing license had been fully reinstated 3 months earlier, a new pin in its place on a coat I finally, actually owned. Milo stood between us at the altar, 5 going on 6, holding the brass compass that now had a second line engraved beneath the first, in Isolde's careful hand, and the family who finds you there. That night, long after the guests had gone, I found Isolde on the study couch, eyes closed. So still, I nearly turned the lamp off and left her to sleep until I caught the smallest curve at the corner of her mouth and understood, the way I'd come to understand most things about her, that she was testing something again. "You're not actually asleep," I said, smiling. "I wanted to see," she said, without opening her eyes, who he'd run to first if he woke and found the house dark. And now she opened her eyes, and there was no ice in them at all, hadn't been for a year, and there wouldn't be again. "Now I already know the answer," she said, "and it isn't a test anymore. It's just home." Milo padded in a few minutes later anyway, half asleep, compass in hand, and climbed without hesitation into the space between us on that couch, and I watched Isolde Thorn, feared by boardrooms. Once frozen by grief, once so certain love was a debt she'd already failed to pay, fold her arms around both of us like she'd finally found the one thing she was never going to let the tide take. It turns out, the coldest people are usually just the ones still guarding the warmest rooms in themselves, waiting for someone brave enough, or small enough, to walk in without knocking. Being overlooked doesn't mean being unworthy of being found. Sometimes it just means the right person hasn't come looking yet. The end. There's something about a house full of people who are supposed to be afraid of each other finally choosing one another instead that I don't think I'll ever get tired of writing, and I hope you felt that landing tonight the way I did putting it together. If Ren and Isolde's story kept you here till the end, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to know, what was the moment in this story where you felt Isolde's walls actually start to crack? Drop it in the comments, I read every one. Until next time, keep that light on for the next story, because there's always another door about to open.